Hi, all. I can't be there today, but I didn't want to fall behind with what we've been studying in class. Native Americans is one of my favorite units to teach, so I feel a little cheated even though I'm um, home sitting here with my bowl of popcorn and my glass of ice water. I'm sitting on my deck, actually. You can see the trees in the back. And I'm going to be munching on this while we sit here, so I guess in some ways I have the far better setup. But I didn't want to just give you the textbook because the textbook doesn't cover this subject with the depth that I had hoped to give you. So we are going to be studying Native Americans, and as we're doing this unit, I'll go over the focus questions in just a moment. But as we're doing the unit, I need to make sure that you, one, have your workbook with you, because you will be taking notes. We're going to be finishing up the unit we did on the stereotypes versus realities. Well, almost finishing. We are not going to go over the discussion on where did they originate, because I want to do that with you, and you did some homework on that I want to bring into the discussion. And then when you're finished with that, we are going to be doing the wisdom, or actually prior to that, we are going to be doing the wisdom of the ages, and you'll be writing down what you think the moral of the story is. Miss Smith will be with you today. Please treat her with respect. She is a great gal, good friend, and a good substitute, so please make sure you are respectful to her. And I've asked her that if you have, now I can't even imagine this happening, you guys are such awesome kids, but if there are any behavioral problems, I've asked her to remove the students who are a problem, take them over to Flood's room, where you will be able to write the Constitution. See how lucky you are? So that's what we're doing today. So let's start by having you get your workbooks out. We're going to begin with the wisdom of the elders. And while you're getting set up to write the moral of the story, and you can either do it on that note section we used last time, or if you still have journal write section in the journal write, you can write it there. So either in that journal write section or go a page over to your notes. You can do the moral of the story there. Now while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and get set up to go over the focus questions for what we're talking about today. Okay, so if you'll remember our enduring understanding, or the big question, the big idea that I'm hopeful you'll remember long after this class, long after this school year, is that Native Americans were and are diverse and unique, and that they have and are continuing to contribute a great deal to American culture. Our focus questions that will direct the lecture today are in what ways were pre-Columbian Native American cultures distinct and similar to European culture in the use of land and resources? And specifically, today we'll be looking at focus question 2, which is what are some of the ways Native American stereotypes differ from the realities of Native American life, both in the past and in the present. So we're going to begin class, as I indicated, with the wisdom of the elders. Today we'll be doing the Lakota origin story. It's a different storyteller than we've listened to previously, but as you're listening to the story, I'm going to ask you to please write down what you think the moral of the story is, and be prepared to share that as a class with Miss Smith when you're finished.
Grandchildren, today I come and I want to share some stories with you, so that these stories will never die. These stories are going to be yours, your responsibility to carry on for the next generation. Someday when you're parents, when you are grandparents, you're going to be ensured that your grandchildren, your children know these stories. You know, all ethnic groups around the world have an idea or a belief as to where did everything come from? Where did this world come from? Where did the sun come from? Where did the moon? Where did the trees come from? Where did I come from? And they have a belief of creation or evolution or a combination of the two. But they have some sort of idea where everything came from. Well, as Lakota people, we still talk about our origin story on where everything came from. We talk about an entity we refer to as Ea. Ea was a power, a massive power, very, very powerful, very powerful, that nothing else could exist except for Ea. Ea, at a point, took a part of itself and began to form this orb, and squeezing tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, until what oozed out of it looked like its blue blood, leaving a half hard, brittle body. And Ea called it Makha, earth. Makha existed in total darkness, questioning Ea. What's my purpose? What's my reason for being here? Why am I here? Is there anything else? Ea took other parts of itself and created Apewi, the sun, Hawewi, the moon, Wichakpi Oyate, the stars, the galaxies, the universe, and put everything in correlation with itself. And time went on. Time went on. But at a point, Makha complained. When I face to Ampewi, it becomes very hot, uncomfortable. And so when I turn and I face to Hangwewi, the moon, it becomes dark and it gets cold. Could you give me a covering, something to protect myself? Ea, in counsel with the other entities of itself, told Makha, if we give you a covering, you must promise to bring forth life and to nourish it. Makha promised. And so life went on. Life went on for time, a very long time. But at a point, life became ugly, very corrupt, senseless destruction, killing. Makha said, this is not the way that life is intended to be upon me. I must cleanse. Now try to imagine all of these catastrophes happening all at the same time. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, hundreds of them, hundreds of tornadoes. Makha, this one-half landmass, shaking and shaking and shaking, shaking so hard that the one-half landmass broke apart, separating the peoples into the different continents. And life went on. But at a point again, eons of time later, life again became very corrupt. Very corrupt. Makha said, I must cleanse again. Those of you that are keeping the ways of life as intended to be, come deep down inside me, where I may protect you. Again, these catastrophes. And it came in the form of the Ice Age, changing the surface of the world. When the ice melted back, leaving lakes, bodies of water everywhere. Small lakes, rivers. In this beautiful area today, known as the Black Hills, Chesapa, in the southern Black Hills, we have a trickster in our culture. We call him Iktomi. Iktomi was walking around in the Black Hills. He was wandering around. It was an era of giants, dinosaurs, and bears. Iktomi heard this heavy breathing and took to hiding under the bushes because he thought he was going to be trampled. But he didn't hear the thrashing of trees and shrubs and just a heavy breathing. Now curiosity always gets the best of Iktomi. So he came out from hiding, listening to that breathing. He followed it, and he came upon this opening in the ground. Peered down into that opening and felt the wind come up, and the wind being drawn back in. He looked down into the opening, and he saw the subterranean species living deep down in that hold, calling down to them. He said, come up here, come here. But they were afraid. No, 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 go away, leave us alone. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you. Come up here. I want to show you something. One brave young individual says, I'll go see. And this individual came out, the very first one to come back to the surface of the world. And we call him Trokahe, which means the very first. Came back to the surface of the world. Iktomi says, look about you. Look around you. Look around you. Look how beautiful it is. Feel the warmth of that sun. Isn't that nice? Feel that cool breeze. Here, try some of these choke cherries. Eat some of these plums. Aren't they delicious? Lay down in that soft green grass. That little stream of water, taste that. It's wonderful. And why do you want to live deep down in that dark hole when you can come up and you can have all of this? Go get your people. I'm going to go find my friend. We're going to prepare a grand feast for you. Bring your people up here. Tokai says, I will do it. He goes back down into the hole, gathers the people together, and he talks about everything he experienced, how wonderful it was. But an elder is there. An elder says, Tokai, there is danger. You do not know all of the danger that lurks up there. Tokai says, no, I've seen it all. It's wonderful. We must get ready to go. The elder says, he's being very foolish. I must go ahead and make plans for when danger strikes. And so the old man sneaks away from the group, comes out of the opening, and transforms into the Buffalo Nation. Trokaya and the rest, they emerge out. And Iktomi is there with his companion, Anugite, the double-faced woman. Very, very beautiful on one side. But she would not let the people see her on this side. She served them. She talked to them, always on one side. Then at a point, after the people had gorged themselves, they ate. They were in the water swimming. They were sleeping in the grass. Sunbathing, you might say. And then Anugita turns, and she shows the ugliness, the hideous side of her. And the people panic. They scream. They run back to the opening. But their bodies had grown because of all the food they had eaten. All of the air that they breathed in, the water, their bodies grew. They couldn't fit back into that opening to go back down. Now Iktomi loves to trick people. And when he sees them make a mistake, or he sees them hurt themselves, or when they're in misery, he laughs. He laughs. I did it. I did it. They're trapped on the surface. I did it. I got him. He's rolling on the ground laughing. Buffalo Nation comes forward. Buffalo Nation says, we are here for you. All that we are is for you. We are your food. We're your shelter, your medicine, your tools. And we became known as the Buffalo people, following the buffalo, relying upon the buffalo for everything. And the Buffalo Nation has never let us down. Because as we began to adopt and adapt to living on the surface of the world again, you might say we became a little overbearing, taken more than we needed, taken without respect, taken without giving anything back. The four-leggeds, the winged ones, they cut off communication with us. He says, it's because of these two-leggeds that the world had to cleanse twice. Maybe this would be a better world without these two-leggeds. We should get rid of them. Yes, let's do it. We can do it. We can send into these two-leggeds all of these sicknesses, all of these diseases, and wipe them out, as they were going to proceed to do so. Underneath them, the plant life. The plant life said, it is not up to them to decide who lives or who dies. For every sickness, every illness, they send into the two-leggeds. We have a root, we have a medicine, an herb. And so the balance was kept, and life went on. Life went on for a time again. But again, as two-leggeds, we became overbearing. Again, no respect, no honor. Creations. What are we going to do about these two-leggeds? Oh, Buffalo Nation. Buffalo Nation, you said you would be responsible for these two-leggeds. Look at the way they are. What are you going to do? Buffalo Nation said, we will take care of it. What are you going to do? You cannot go to them the way you are. They're very destructive. They'll kill you. They'll eat you. They consume everything. What are you going to do? Buffalo Nation said, we will take care of it. So at a point in time, they sent to us from the Buffalo Nation the white buffalo calf woman, bringing to us the sacred pipe to remind us that there is to be a spiritual connection of what is on this earth is in the stars. It's in the universe, and what's in the stars is on this earth, and the spiritual connection must be kept. Remember that story. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Very different from the ones we've done previously. Hope it didn't put you to sleep sitting in front of the fire there. At least you're not like me sitting there eating this popcorn and sitting in front of the fire. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the story and that you enjoyed the discussion with Miss Smith. Now we're going to shift gears here and we're going to look at the stereotypes versus realities in Native culture. This is the lecture we started last time. If you're not in your notes, quickly get there. Miss Smith, if you need to pause to get them in their notes to this place, do so. Remember that as you are listening to this portion of the lecture, you are to fill in at least 5 notes per each section. So you fill in that section with new content, new things you're learning. It is open note. The walkaway for this exam and this exam only is open note. So you will need to ensure that you have adequate content to do the exam. So that said, we've already covered this particular stereotype that Native Americans were all alike. The reality, as we talked about in class, is there are 520 culturally distinct tribes, very different groups of people. I'd like to start with a new area today, and I want to look at the stereotype that Native Americans were conquered because they were inferior. So what is the reality? Reality is Native Americans were conquered because of a lack of immunity to disease. They had no immunity to common diseases that Europeans had dealt with for the last 1,000 years. The flu, the cold, malaria, more tragic diseases like smallpox, the bubonic plague, the black plague, diseases that had swept throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia from about 500 AD to 1500 AD. These people have not built up any resistance to it. So when they're first exposed to the cough, to a cold, to the flu, they're literally dying like flies. Now, let's go to that question. If they're dying so easily, were their bodies inferior? I guess it depends on how you look at it. Prior to 1491, looking at the evidence, the skeletal remains, the evidence we found of Native Americans, it appears that Native Americans were actually outliving their European, African, and Asian counterparts. That is, they were living 15 years longer than were those on the other side of the Atlantic. Now, why were they living 15 years longer? Well, one was their diet. They had a much healthier diet. The other piece is there was less, it was more ethnically pure, meaning there was less exposure to other cultures other peoples, other illnesses. So in some respects, their bodies were superior. They were healthier. However, they weren't prepared for those illnesses that are going to come across the Atlantic with the Columbian Exchange. So as a result of European illnesses like smallpox and malaria, most historians and anthropologists can agree that approximately 90 to 96% of the population of the Americas in 1491 will die within 15 years of Europeans arriving in North America. 90 to 96%. Can you imagine if, an alien race were to come to the United States today, and within 50 years, 96% of us and our children and our grandchildren who would have been born from us were all dead. The stories, the legends, the people themselves, all gone because of illness. That's really what conquered Native Americans. It was illness, their lack of immunity to diseases. Now I want to give you an example with the picture you see on the screen. I'm going to change pictures, but I'm going to come back to the picture in a minute. That picture was drawn by a priest who traveled with Cortez to Tenochtitlan in 1520. You see on your screen a picture of an artistic rendition of what they believe Tenochtitlan looked like in 1520. Let me show you where Cortez came from, as well as the priest that was with him. So I'm going to change screens here. You see the map in the corner there. It shows the Caribbean islands in the West Indies. Over on the right, a small little island. You can see it says San Antonio. That was on the southern portion of what is now Santo Domingo. Cortez came over to the West Indies in 1518. Remember, Columbus discovered it in 1492. And the crown at that time had a policy, the Spanish crown, Ferdinand and Isabel, called Quinto Real, in which if a conquistador could fund and, so like he could get the ships, he could get the men, an expedition, discover new places, and take that land on behalf of the crown, so conquer it, make it Spanish-held territory with King Ferdinand, Queen Isabel in charge of that territory. The conquistador would receive 1/5 of what he conquered. So 1/5 of the landmass, 1/5 of the gold, the silver, the whatever he conquered would belong to him. 4/5 would go to the crown. So Cortez, being a young man who wanted to have more than what he had at that time, left the West Indies. He took boats, kind of crossed across Yucatan Peninsula. You can see that last place right before he's going to go inland to Tenochtitlan, called Zempoala. He, at that point, disembarked. He actually had his first officer burn the boats so none of his men could escape and go back. And then he marched across land to Tenochtitlan, which is where modern-day Mexico City's at. When he got into Tenochtitlan, he and his men were amazed at the city they saw there. Now, we'll have some time in the future that where we can talk about the city they discovered here. But what I want to talk about is first exposure to illness. This is 1520. This is the very beginning of European expansion into the Americas. When they discover this island that you see here, a man-made island, by the way, the city of Tenochtitlan, the men who discovered it were amazed. They'd never seen anything like it. It was larger than Rome and London combined at that time. It was larger than Paris. Had a population of 250,000 people. Clean, paved streets, beautiful buildings, colleges, universities, stunning place. And Cortez, of course, wanted it, because by Quinto Real, if he conquered it, he got 1/5 of everything that they found there, the gold, the silver, etc. So he and his men came into the city on one of those avenues you see, probably the main broad, wide avenue there in the center. And one of the men, they went in, they were welcomed in to the main palace, which is in the center area, this main palace compound by Montezuma, the emperor of the Aztecs. And they were fed and treated like royal guests, royal dignitaries. Montezuma wanted to know all he could about these white-faced people. He'd never seen a Spaniard before, nor had he seen someone as hairy as a European. Pure Native Americans of pure blood don't have the body hair that Europeans have, so they wouldn't have had beards or mustaches or chest hair. And these Europeans looked like bears to him. They were such like animals that could talk, you know. So they were intrigued by them, and they invited him into their capital city. Great story there, which we don't have time to go into. But at one point, Cortez and his men steal from Montezuma. So they're kicked out of the city. Unfortunately for the people who lived in Tenochtitlan, one of the men that was with Cortez and his group had, not knowing it, but he had brought with him smallpox. So as we talk about how they were conquered because of a lack of immunity to disease, I want to go back to this picture I showed you. The picture on the screen shows you first exposure to smallpox. This was drawn by one of those priests that was with Cortez, and you can see what happened. If you look at the picture closely, you'll see these men who get smallpox. The man speaking to him is the medicine man, and in the first picture it says 114 on it. You see the man all bundled up, he's dying, and the other man's talking to him and giving him wisdom. And then the next picture down, just right below the 114, now the man is laying on a mat. This is now the medicine man, so he's now come down with the illness that the man before did. It spreads very, very quickly. And if you look up at the top right-hand corner, you see the man is sick, and by the bottom right-hand corner, he's dead. If you look closely at the picture, you'll see the man has pustules all over him. This is smallpox. Smallpox exhibits itself both internally and externally. So the person, when you originally get it, you'd come down with fever, and then you'd get large pustules or bumps underneath your arm where your lymph nodes are at, and also on your neck. And within 2 days, you start to develop boils, pus-filled boils, pustules all over your skin. They'd be very painful. But that's not the worst part, because what really kills you is those same pustules you see developing externally are developing internally on your organs. So what would kill this person you see on the screen is that their lungs are literally melting with sores. The sores are just filled with blood, and you choke on your own blood. You die. Your lungs fill up with blood, and you drown. It's a devastating way to die. I'd like to take a minute, because smallpox is going to impact so many of these communities. We're going to watch a little video on how smallpox impacted the natives who...
By 1520, the Spanish have already settled the Caribbean islands when Hernando Cortez occupies the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan in Mexico. He hopes to capture new slaves and a bounty of gold. The Aztecs are a highly militarized society and eventually drive the Spaniard and his small army from the city.
It was a major, major defeat. The Aztecs essentially drove Cortez out of town. But one of the soldiers retreating had smallpox. The Native Americans had absolutely no immunity to most European diseases, smallpox most of all.
Cortez reorganizes his troops and months later heads back to re-engage the Aztec warriors. But this time he encounters little resistance. The virus has done most of his work for him. Bodies line the streets of Tenochtitlan. A vast proportion of the Aztec population is dead.
It seems that the Indians were unusually susceptible to the disease. Death rates of 70 to 90% were common, and this was true all the way down through the Andean region.
Smallpox spreads down through the Central American peninsula and into South America, terrorizing the natives with its relentless death toll and ghastly skin eruptions.
The fact that this virus appeared at about the same time as the Spanish gave it that much more of a psychological impact, so that we felt that these people had magic powers, that they were escaping this infection that was devastating all of the Native American populations.
In 1532, Spanish conqueror Francisco Pizarro finds the ancient civilization of the Incas in chaos and its leaders dead. Some historians estimate that the smallpox virus has reduced the population of Peru to 1/4 of its original size.
So essentially it wasn't the Spanish army that conquered the Native Americans, it was smallpox.
The smallpox virus also appears in North America around the same time as Europeans seek to conquer and colonize the new land.
The Pilgrims record the fact that God saw fit to come amongst the native people and take away great numbers of them to make room for us. Well, actually, there had been a massive smallpox epidemic in the preceding 2 years.
As in Central and South America, the virus spreads like wildfire as the colonial borders push westward into new frontiers. In 1763, colonial British officers stationed near Fort Pitt, Pennsylvania, face a confrontation with local natives. Sir Geoffrey Amherst, Commander-in-Chief of the British forces in America, suggests a new weapon to battle the contentious Indians in a letter to another colonel.
Could it not be contrived to send the smallpox among these disaffected tribes of Indians? We must on this occasion use every stratagem in our power to reduce them.
Shortly afterwards, a British officer writes in his journal that the plan is in motion.
We gave them 2 blankets and a handkerchief out of the smallpox hospital. I hope it will have the desired effect.
No official documents record the success of this operation. However, in the ensuing months, hundreds of Mingo, Delaware, and Shawnee Native Americans die. This is quite possibly the first ever use of a biological weapon. In 1709, the virus reaches the Pacific Ocean, infecting Native Americans in California's missions. In the course of just under 200 years, smallpox has reduced these once robust nations to a fraction of their original population.
Okay, so next time you hear someone say, well, Native American weaponry, Native American bodies were inferior, that's why they're not here anymore. What is the reality? Can't hear you. What is it? Okay, they were conquered because of a lack of immunity to disease. So that's the second stereotype I want to talk about. Let's go to the third stereotype. And that is that if Native Americans had united, they could have prevented the European invasions. Well, this is a really easy one to cover. We can do it in 3 minutes. Well, yeah, if they had united, they could have prevented European invasions. But please remember the reality. These guys were culturally different. They spoke different languages. They prayed to different gods. They had different weaponry. Many of them were traditional enemies. You know, the United States and Iran and Iraq could unite to stop outsiders, but the truth is we have such a history as enemies. It would be very difficult for us to merge and make political and military alliances because we are so culturally different. The same stands true of Native Americans. They were culturally different, and they also lived very far apart from one another. Remember the size of the United States. We are a massive country. We are the 5th or the 3rd largest country in the world. Let's see if we can get back to that map we started with a moment ago. That's a big place. Those people who lived on the East Coast, the Eastern Woodland Indians, or the Eastern Woodland Natives, the Haudenosaunee, were thousands of miles away from the Paiute. They didn't even know the other one existed. When the California natives were being conquered by the Spaniards, the Haudenosaunee didn't even know the Spaniards were there. This is a very large continent. And then the third thing that would have made it difficult for them to unite and fight back is that they were dealing with their own tomorrow. You know, you wake up and there's sky is covered with spaceships. Okay? You know, you're like Pocahontas looking out and seeing the ships on the horizon. And the only way we can fight back is to unite with Iran and Russia and Iraq and Afghanistan and the Taliban. That's the only way we're going to be able to fight back. Well, that right there would be tough. Now let's say you don't have a car. You don't have a plane. You don't have the means to get to Iran or Russia or telephone or telegram. You can't communicate with them to come up with an alliance to fight back. Now let's add to that, 96% of us are dying. You see the reality here that it would have been extraordinarily difficult for Native Americans to create a pan-American alliance to fight back and prevent European invasion. Okay, the fourth stereotype I want to talk about is that idea that Native Americans were not civilized until Europeans came. They were, living nomadic, eating the food they could find, digging in the bush, and were uneducated, had no literature, no knowledge, no paintings, no arts, no music. They were just ignorant savages waiting for us to come and teach them about a better world. Because I think that is a very prevalent stereotype. The reality is, Native Americans were civilized. However, their cultures were different than European culture. I have a brother-in-law from Iraq, and he likes to listen to Iraqi music, and I listen to it, and it sounds like gibberish to me. It doesn't sound like music at all. It's music to him. It's complex. It has a variety of instruments. He likes it. The fact that I don't like it, does it mean it's not music? Some of your music I don't like. Some of you don't like my music. Does that mean it's not music simply because one of us doesn't like it? That's kind of the same thing you need to do when you're looking at this stereotype. Native Americans did have complex cultures. They were just simply different than what Europeans were doing. And in that vein, I want to talk a little bit more about Cahokia. Remember, we introduced you to Cahokia with the homework assignment you did last week on Mound, Those Are Heavy Hills. So I'm going to put on another little YouTube clip, and we're going to look at what Cahokia was like. As you watch this, maybe you could take some notes on their civilization and look at just how complex, how beautiful this civilization was.
The Cocha wanted to send a prayer to the sun. So he called on his friend the bear, and the bear came and he said, "Oh, I'm very honored to be asked to do this, but I can only take it to the top of the highest tree. But I know someone who can. So let's call Eagle." And so Eagle was called, and Eagle said, "Yes, I can try." And so Eagle flew and flew and flew up, and got to the sun and delivered the prayer. And the sun was so taken with this, he said, "Give me one of your feathers." And so the eagle plucked out a tail feather and gave it to the sun, and the sun kissed that feather, which is why, eagle feathers are black on the end, and it's because the sun sends them there. He said, "Take this back, and forever this will be my recognition of my special people."
Along the Mississippi River, 6 miles from present-day St. Louis, Missouri, there stood a city that once dominated the heart of the continent. At its center was a powerful leader.
A great number of years ago, there appeared among us a man who came down from the sun. This man told us that he had seen from on high that we did not govern ourselves well, that we had no master, that each of us had presumption enough to think himself capable of governing others, while he could not even conduct himself.
1,000 years ago, the great sun, a leader who was both king and pope, lived atop a man-made royal mountain 10 stories high. Its 16-acre base larger than any pyramid in Egypt.
He told us that in order to live in peace among ourselves, we must observe the following points. We must never kill anyone but in defense of our own lives. We must never know any woman besides our own. We must never take any things that belong to another. We must never lie, nor get drunk. We must not be avaricious. We must give generously and with joy, and share our subsistence with those who are in need of it.
From the heights of his royal estate, the great sun mediated between the Creator and the people, between the sun and the earth. This is Cahokia, city of the sun. The great sun ruled the thriving center of a vast Mississippian culture. Outside the walled city, communities of farmers, hunters, and fishermen stretched for miles, surrounded by fields of corn. With 20,000 residents, no city in the United States would surpass Cahokia's historic size before 1800. Only then would Philadelphia's population eclipse the ancient center.
These people lived in daub and wattle houses on top of the principal people did, the priest and the royalty. They lived in very substantial houses, not teepees. Not teepees. Teepees, Western Plains people. Down here they lived in houses. They were sedentary. They were farmers. They used the rivers and the bayous and the streams as not only for commerce but for sustenance as well.
With the Mississippi and other major rivers as its highways, Cahokia was linked by trade to a third of the continent. Copper arrived from the Great Lakes, obsidian from Yellowstone, mica and crystal from the Appalachians, gold and silver from Canada, shell from the Gulf of Mexico.
Look at these old live oak trees that have seen so much pass by them. Magnificently dressed Indian people coming down that bayou in a dugout, greeting people, standing right here on this bank, of having a good time, because they did. You know, Indian people have always known how to have a good time. And there would be a feast prepared. The women would put the corn together. They'd make sofki. They would roast a deer. The people would bring gifts. You never go to an Indian's house without bringing something that's as old as the sunrise.
Cahokia was the pinnacle of a mound-building culture with traditions dating back to before 1000 BC. Thousands of mounds still dot the landscape from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. An average funeral mound in the Ohio Valley was 3 stories tall. Construction could represent 200,000 man-hours of labor, or 100 men carrying the baskets of earth for a year. But few mounds compare with the religious effigy located 50 miles east of Cincinnati, Ohio, the Great Serpent Mound. The enormous snake stretches over 400 yards in length. While their earthworks are the mound builders' most visible legacy, their smaller creations are their most beautiful. Only glimpses remain of the people who changed the course of life on the northern continent. Most of their material world, wooden buildings, boats, baskets, woven textiles, leather footwear, and clothes, have long since turned to dust.
An old Caddo relative of mine said that I used to go outside and hold my hands up and bless myself with the sun, hot. Well, I can't do that anymore because they say we sun worshipers. So we didn't worship the sun. We worshiped what was behind it, the power behind it.
You know, as you look at the pictures on the screen and you think a little bit about Tenochtitlan, the village I showed you earlier, you have to wonder just what a tragedy. What was lost when all those people died? Because as people die, their cultures die with them. There was no one to transfer their languages. Entire languages lost. Works of art, knowledge. We found in Mesoamerica, what is Mexico, written records. And we know that when the priests arrived in Tenochtitlan, one of the first things they did was go into the libraries and destroy their written records, their brass and copper, even gold and silver plates that they had etched books and texts and religious scripture into. And you just think, wow, what a loss. You know, the Rembrandts, the Picassos, the Bach's and Beethoven's, the masterpieces, the works of art, the music, the stories, everything that was lost when a fifth of the world population died. They were civilized. They had unique, rich cultures. They were just different than ours. Okay, the fifth stereotype I want to address, we're not going to address right now, so we're going to hold this one. This one I want to talk about when I get back because of your homework assignment. Let's go on to number 6. Number 6 reads, all Native Americans were warlike and treacherous. So if you look at the reality on the screen, let's have you write that down, then let me talk about the pictures. All Native Americans were warlike and treacherous. The reality is Native Americans were fighting to defend their lands, their way of life. Imagine how frightening it would be to see everyone you know dying from illnesses that you didn't understand. And then on the heels of that illness, to have people like you'd never seen before, people of a different colored skin that you didn't even know existed prior to this, speaking languages, practicing religions you'd never heard about coming into your lands. Those Native Americans that survived that initial onslaught of illness were fighting to defend their land, fighting to defend their faith and their religion that they believed in as wholeheartedly as you believe in yours. So they weren't inherently warlike and treacherous. They were humans. There were good ones. There were bad ones. There were kind ones. There were mean ones. They had evil. They had good. They were like you and me. They were not any more warlike nor any more treacherous than European, Asians, or Africans. Now, rather than show you pictures of natives doing treacherous things, I want to give you a comparison. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a castle in Europe in the Middle Ages. I show this picture to show that death and destruction is not indigenous to North America or South America. Europeans had been doing a fine job of killing each other and destroying each other long before they discovered Native Americans. It's human nature, you know. You want more, you take. And then the other side of that is you're kind, you're good. There's as many hero stories as there are villain stories. That's true of Europeans, that's true of Native Americans. The other example that I use is on the bottom right-hand corner. It's kind of a nasty picture. And you'll see that it's an article, and the soldier speaking to the native, and he says, "Bring me the scalps, and the king, our master, will reward you." You know, often when people talk about how just horrific, you know, they'll say, "Oh, Native Americans, it's a good thing that we came here, because before we got here they were really like animals, and our coming and bringing them Christianity taught them to be kind and nice to their neighbor." And people will give as evidence of just how horrible they were the practice of scalping. What is ironic is that scalping actually was not a native practice. There's absolutely no evidence of it being a native practice until after their exposure to the French came out of Canada, where the French conquered that same year as the English went to Jamestown, 1607. The French will go up into Quebec 1607, and then French trappers and traders will move across the north, and they will bring the practice of scalping. And it was very popular, believe it or not, in the 1600s for Europeans to hang native scalps on the walls of their castles or their estates to show their wealth and their, elitism. So yeah, French trappers and traders would either scalp, or they would pay other natives to scalp for them, and then they would sell the scalps on the market like you sell a mink pelt or rabbit pelt to make a coat. Pretty disgusting. But the reality, again, Native Americans were fighting to defend their home, their children, their family, their God. They were not any more warlike or treacherous than the European nations or Africans. Okay, our seventh stereotype is one that I find really intriguing simply because of how wrong it is. The seventh stereotype is that Native Americans had nothing to contribute. Well, the reality is, evident on your screen and in the bucket of popcorn I'm eating in front of me, the reality is they had contributions that have enriched the world and made it so much better. Hundreds of contributions to who we are. Now on this screen I want to talk about the physical contributions. In the very bottom left-hand corner you're going to see a picture. It's called the Columbian Exchange. I want you to look at some of the foods on that Columbian Exchange that are going from Europe, that are going from the Americas over to Europe, Africa, and Asia. And then I've got some of those on the screen that I thought were that have changed how we live. Maize, or corn. In the upper left-hand corner you see a picture of some fresh sweet corn. You can see some in my hand right now too, because that's what I'm eating. In the bottom, in the center, you see corn as it evolves. The first evidence of corn we find in caves down in Peru, and it looked like the grain you see on the far left, with just a few small kernels. Those grains of corn have been magnified, obviously, so you can see, because they were very small, they were the size of wheat or barley. The natives in South America hybridized, grew the corn, mixing it with other varieties to get, and you can see it evolving in the picture, to the stunted corn on the far right, to the corn you see up in the upper left-hand corner. Maize was not native, like the corn we know, didn't come in that wonderful sweet corn that we eat with dinner, or we pop and put butter on, or that we use to drive our cars, or to make the roof of this building here is made out of a corn foam. And corn, we eat it, we wear it, we live under it, and we drive it. I mean, corn is the most, and all of our animals eat it. So it's what feeds the meat we eat. It is the most produced crop in the world today, and more corn, by the way, is grown in North America than anywhere else in the world today too. Largely, by the way, in the Great Plains. That, if you remember that from your geography area. But corn comes from America. There was no corn in Europe, Africa, or Asia in 1491. They never heard of it. Tomato, my personal favorite. Imagine a pizza without tomato, spaghetti without tomato. Comes from the Americas. The potato, a root crop, gets less disease, illness, less prone to freeze, can last long periods of time, very high in vitamin A, vitamin C. Potato comes from the Americas. Vanilla bean you see on the far right. On the bottom right you see the rubber tree, comes from the Americas. In the center, cocoa beans or chocolate. Those are the cocoa, that's a cocoa pod. If you take those out and dry them, grind them into powder, you got chocolate. And then on the far left, in the middle of the tobacco plant. Down in the bottom right-hand screen, something that came uniquely from North America, and that was the maple syrup. All of those are plants, hybridized, grown, processed by Native American peoples that have changed the diet of the world. But it's not just those kind of products that they're giving to the world. Native American ideas of democracy shaped the government that we have today in the United States. And in fact, in Benjamin Franklin, we're going to do this later when we talk about this 2-3 months, when they're writing the Constitution, looks at the written plan of government for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the Constitutional Convention to help come up with the idea of a constitution like we have today. When Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, when we read, and they're written records, we can listen to them their record, their arguments being recorded, we can read their debates over what kind of government we should have, and what they're referencing, as much as European thought, are native ideas on democracy. And then in the 19th century, in the 1800s, the Haudenosaunee idea of gender relations, what is the role of men and women, what power should women have in a society, will impact our ideas of American feminism. Haudenosaunee women were voting long before Europeans showed up on these shores, and that's going to evolve into American feminism today. Their contributions have enriched the world. If you look up in the upper right-hand corner, you see a picture of Squanto. Squanto's name is actually Tisquantum. He is one of the first men to meet the settlers when they arrived in the New World. He teaches them how to grow corn. He teaches them how to survive. Sacagawea, who takes Lewis and Clark across the Americas, they wouldn't have made it without her. She's the one who's able to feed them when they run out of food. And when they get to the Rockies, it's her relationship with her brother that helps them survive and get across the Rockies and get horses. In the Revolutionary War, Native Americans fought alongside George Washington. In the War of 1812, they fight with the British and with us. In the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the Gulf War, and the War on Terrorism, Native Americans make up a huge percentage of the American military. And in fact, as a percentage of the population, there are more Native Americans serving in the military than any other singular group. So the stereotype that there's nothing they contribute to our culture is grossly wrong. It's obscenely wrong, because they have a great deal to enrich the world. They did it now, and they continue to do so. Our eighth stereotype is that all Native Americans did not value or empower women. And the reality there is that in many Native cultures, women often wielded considerable power. The example there is in the Haudenosaunee, where women, and only women, were allowed to vote for their leadership. But women could only vote for men. Their belief was the woman who is largely raising a child, who gave birth to the child, will choose leaders who will protect and nurture the tribe and will be more hesitant to go to warfare. So women could vote, and they would vote for the men to protect them. So women often wielded considerable power, and I actually have two pictures on the screen of Eastern Woodland women. One is named Weetamoo. She's a Wampanoag native in the Massachusetts area. Some of you will have an opportunity to read a book about her in this next unit when you read your novel. And the other is Pocahontas, a woman who, Algonquin, so down by Jamestown. She defies the rules at a very young age, 13. She's the first one to make first contact with the European settlers, convinces her fathers to help them survive, to feed them and take care of them. She eventually she lives in two cultures. She lives with Algonquin, and she also lives with the Jamestown colonists. She marries two husbands. One is an Algonquin husband, and her second husband is a colonist, John Rolfe, who is the first one to bring tobacco into the colonies. Both women of incredible power in their tribes. Weetamoo becomes a Sachem, a tribal leader, a chiefess, and Pocahontas, of course, meets the king of England and his wife. So very, very powerful women. The ninth stereotype is that Native Americans had no religion. There's not a lot we need to say about this, because it's got to be evident in the wisdom of the elders we've been learning, the stories we've learned, and the stories you read. Native Americans were deeply religious. That's the reality. They just weren't Christian. They had their own religions. Simply because they're not your religion or my religion doesn't mean they're not religious. They had their own religions. They were deeply religious. Our second to last stereotype is that Native Americans are a vanished race. There are no more. They were here in 1491, but the illnesses killed them, and now they're gone. That's not correct. In the 2000 census, there were over 4 million Native Americans in present-day United States. If you look on the map that you see on the screen, the darker areas represent where there are more Native Americans living today. So if you look carefully, you can see, find Utah in there. Find the Four Corners area, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado. Or excuse me, Arizona. That's where the Dene or Navajo reservation is. That's the largest reservation in the continental United States. And a big chunk of that 4 million are represented there. We also see the Sioux up in South Dakota and North Dakota. And then, of course, the Inuit people in Alaska. So there are over 4 million Native Americans still contributing to our society today. And that's what I want to talk about with our last stereotype. And the last stereotype is that Native Americans are confined to reservations. They live in teepees, they wear braids, and they ride horses. Here's the reality. They are not confined to reservation. In fact, of those 4 million, on the 2000 census, only half of them currently live on reservations. They live in towns like Orem, towns like Minneapolis, towns like New York, towns like San Francisco, towns like American Fork. Few of them wear braids. Some may choose to do so, but most wear hair like you. They might ride a horse recreationally for fun, but they have cars, just like you do. Very few live in teepees, nor did their ancestors live in teepees. They have homes like you do. And to end that last piece, I want to give you numerous examples of Native Americans that are living life just like you. Some of you may have heard of famous Dave Anderson. He's an Ojibwe Choctaw native, lives up in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and is the owner of Famous Dave's Restaurant. You have over 90 million in revenues. It's 87 restaurants, barbecue restaurant. You see him on the screen. He's won a number of awards for his humanitarian service, and a lot of his money is used to fight drug and alcohol abuse on Native American reservations. Another example of a Native American not confined to a reservation is one of the leaders of the AIM, American Indian Movement, in the 1970s, Anna May Pictou Aquash. She was a Micmac and a political activist who fought the system, college educated, disagreed with the treatment of Native Americans, and led a civil rights movement for Native Americans. Van Barfoot, a Choctaw Native American. World War II, he was given the Medal of Honor for his bravery, heroism. He jumped over a machine gun nest, captured 17 German soldiers, and also repelled a German assault tank, destroyed a Nazi field piece, and carried 2 wounded commandeers to safety. Amazing story, this guy, this Van Barfoot. In fact, while we're on him, I mentioned this earlier, but Native Americans, in 2010, there were over 22,569 enlisted service members on active duty of Native American heritage. Though Native Americans only represent 1.4% of the U.S. population, they represent 1.7% of the military population, and per capita, they are the largest group in the military. Ben Nighthorse Campbell, also a Cheyenne, is a politician. He was a senator. He helped fight to get Custer Battlefield Monument and Little Bighorn. John Bennington Harrington, doctorate, Cherokee. He's a retired naval aviator, a NASA astronaut. He's flown up to space twice on the space shuttle. A person of this area, Larry J. Echo Hawk, was my neighbor actually growing up, so I know him very well. He was the former Attorney General of Idaho, taught law here at Brigham Young University. He's an attorney, very successful attorney. In 2009, he joined Barack Obama's administration as the United States Assistant Secretary for the Interior, Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is a cabinet position. He stepped down in 2012, actually stopped working with Barack Obama to become a general authority for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I think I've got 2 more here. Gil Birmingham, a Comanche, very successful attorney. So I want you to kind of leave behind that idea that Native Americans are confined to reservations. They live in teepees, they wear braids, and ride horses. So with that, we are out of time. At this point, you should have taken a buttload full of notes, 2 pages of notes on the realities of Native culture. And if we've done anything in our time together here, you should now have a very clear understanding that everything you've been taught about Native Americans, a lot of it is false. They have a religion. They are not gone. They don't all live on reservations. We'll talk about the 5th one later. They were no more warlike and treacherous than anybody else. Their contributions have enriched the world. Native women had power. Native Americans were civilized. They had culture just different than ours. They were culturally different. They lived far apart. It would have been very difficult to fight back collectively. And they weren't conquered because of their inferiority. They were conquered because of lack of immunity to disease. And lastly, these groups are far more diverse than we give them credit for. There are over 520 culturally distinct tribes. Okay, when I come back, we'll check those notes. Remember, it is open note for the walkway, so the more notes you've gathered, the better. And I will see you when I get back. Or as our native friend said yesterday, Danaho.